Blazor is a shiny new buzzword in the C# community, but what is it and how do you use it? In this video, I'm going to walk you through a Blazor Server Side application. We will look at what Blazor Server Side is, how it works, and how to make use of it, including how to hook it up to data access code. Before I proceed, I do want to point out that in the description there are links to get the source code for this video, to sign up for my mailing list, to join Patreon, and to get access to my courses. If you're looking to make a career out of C# or want to be better in your C# career, my content can launch you forward faster. Check out all I have to offer at iamtimcorey.com or sign up for my mailing list to hear from me directly. Now, if you haven't come across me before, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. One of the ways I do that is by teaching context. There are a lot of tutorials out there that teach you what to do. I go a few steps beyond that to show you when to do it, why you should or should not do it, what pitfalls to avoid, and what the best practices are. Basically, I get you ready for the real world. If that's the type of training you're interested in, subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon to be notified when I release new videos. Okay, let's go to Visual Studio, and we're going to create a new project. Now we're going to do Blazor Server Side. So we're going to search for Blazor, and we have this Blazor app here. Now this is released. This was released in .NET Core 3.0. Currently we're on .NET Core 3.1. So this is production ready. This is Blazor Server Side, not Blazor Client Side. There is a difference, and we'll talk through that. Hit Next, and we're going to give this application a name. So Blazor Demo UI and Blazor Demo App. And hit Create. And it says I have a solution with that name already on disk. Do I want to overwrite the existing solution? No. Let's do Blazor App instead of Blazor Demo App. That should be good. And it says Blazor Server App. Okay, so this is what we want to use, is a Blazor Server App. Now the difference between server side and client side is that server side still acts a lot like a Razor Pages application or an MVC application in the fact that the server does all the C# work. There is no C# that comes down to the client really, or at least not the same way. Now what happens instead is we keep a connection open from our client, which is the web browser, to the server. And so when any requests are made, that request goes up to the server and gets run there. Blazor Client Side will take an actual .NET runtime down to the client and run C# code at the client level. We're not going to do that here. We're going to run C# on the server, not the client. The benefits are there's a lot less to download, and it's a really fast connection. The downsides are that this is not offline capable. It cannot run when the server is not available. So you can't have a PWA, a progressive web app, that uses Blazor Server Side and has offline capabilities. Okay, so just note that this is not offline capable. But otherwise, this is a really fast, really great option, and it's the only one that is production ready today. .NET Core is going to release a version of Blazor Client Side that should be ready around the May 2020 timeframe. And at that point, then you can have the option of server side or client side. And depending on your situation, you can choose one or the other based upon your needs and the needs of your client. The nice thing is we have both tools in the toolbox. So not everything has to be solved the same way. Okay, so we're going to select Blazor Server App. We're going to configure for HTTPS. We're not going to add authentication or Docker support. Now this is .NET Core 3.1. Hit Create. And this will build out for us our Blazor app. This Blazor app looks a lot like a Razor Pages application or an MVC application. In fact, if you're familiar with those, you'll see a lot of the same structures which help make this an easier transition into this type of application. For example, we have Startup. This is where the application is configured. So we have things like our services here. We have our building for things like routing and endpoints and HTTPS redirection. But we do have this one additional entry here that says Map Blazor Hub. And that's where the SignalR hub is mapped. Okay, now SignalR is the communication mechanism that we use to connect the client to the server. So whenever a web browser opens up, it's going to have a connection, probably a WebSocket connection, back to the server. It's a very efficient, low bandwidth, low impact connection. You can have thousands of them per server. But that's how it's going to connect the client to the server, is through SignalR. And so that's kind of the background. That's where that gets loaded right here, where it says maps the Blazor SignalR hub to the default path. All right, so that's a one tweak we see here. We also see up here under our services, we add server side Blazor. All right, so that is the additional service we add up here that's indicating this is a Blazor application. Now, this does mean that you can mix and match other things like Razor pages. If you want to put Razor pages or MVC in here, you can do that. And it's just like any of the other applications. You just add in the services you need and add in the endpoints you need, and the routing will take care of itself because you'll put in that routing information. All right? So it's very, very similar to MVC and Razor pages. Program.cs, pretty much the exact same thing. Whereas building it out, we're saying, okay, build and run. Done. That's it. All right. So what are the differences? Well, one of the differences is the pages end with .razor instead of .cs HTML. So app.razor, this is kind of the main page here. And it says, okay, I want you to look at the app assembly program.assembly, which is basically Blazor demo UI. That's what we're looking for. And saying if you find route data, then go to that route data, and the default layout is main layout. So what this is saying is when someone requests a route, if you find it, then go ahead and pass that route data in, and the default layout, if they don't specify one, is going to be main layout, which is in shared. A similar concept that we have in Razor pages, but this again is a .razor page, is main layout. Now the cool thing is, this is if it's found, that route is found. If it's not found, use the main layout as the layout, and then inject into that a paragraph that says, sorry, there's nothing at this address. This is kind of like your page not found or 404. Now let's look at the main layout.razor. Pretty similar to any other Razor page, except the fact that we have things like nav menu. That's interesting. And we do have the app body. Okay, that's where the insert of the body, which we're used to, gets inserted. But where do we get the rest of the stuff? So you may say, well, where is the CSS files and the JavaScript files? This main layout doesn't have them. So where are they? Under the pages folder, there is hosts.cshtml. And inside there, you will see this layout page. It looks a little more familiar. It's more like an actual HTML file. So we see the doc type is HTML. We see the language is English. Then we see the head section. And in the head, we see there's the site.css, there's Bootstrap, and then down here we have a script for _framework / blazor.server.js. All right, so what is that? Well, this is kind of the built-in server.js file that we'll use to communicate back to the server. This is kind of like the glue that holds things together. It's going to be the one that talks through the WebSocket to our, or through SignalR to our server to get the information or to call information or to save information. All that will happen there. And this is the way to call that is through this JS file, which we don't have to modify. All right, so this is our design surface for our application. Let's close all this down and let's look at an actual page. So we're going to look at the, let's start with a counter. So there's two pages here that actually do something, and Microsoft has given us a nice example in this application so we can see different pieces. The counter and the fetch data are the two pages that actually do something as Blazor pages. Okay, I get a little confused because this is a Blazor application, and because it's a Blazor application, the extensions we use are .razor, which is very confusing because Razor page applications use extensions of .cshtml. So Razor page applications use CSHTML, Blazor applications use .razor. Yes, it's a little confusing, but it is what it is. So there's two Razor pages that are of more importance in this file as examples. And the first one is counter.razor. Okay, and this is a very simple example of a Blazor page. The very first thing it does, it says, hey, I'm a page, so @page. And then it says, here is my path. Now, if you're familiar with JavaScript frameworks, this is similar to how JavaScript frameworks do it, where the actual single page application has paths. And you can have what looks to be a different page and it's just a different path on the same page. Well, it's a similar concept where we declare this is what the path is to this page. It's /counter. Now, if I made that I made this up, well, then the URL would be our localhost : 12345, whatever the port number is, / I made this up instead of /counter. So this is how we determine what the path to this page is going to be, which means if we want, we can actually say /data /counter, and it would create that path for us. Next, we have our HTML. And then afterwards, we have the @code section. Think of this as the code behind for our Blazor page. Unlike Razor pages, which have a separate page model that kind of acts as the code behind, it's a separate bit of code, Blazor pages have the code right on the page. I'm not a huge fan of that, but at the same time, it does encourage you to keep your code light. Keep it small and focus just on the UI. If you have hundreds of lines of C# code on a Blazor page, you've probably done something questionable at least, okay? And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying you need to question it. You need to think through, am I doing too much in this code? Could I put this into a class library, or could I put this into even just a class file and call it? Okay, so think that through when you write your code. You may have dozens or even 50 lines of code, but when you get to around 100, unless the page is doing a ton of stuff, you're probably putting too much code on, or too much C# code on the page. So just a kind of a rule of thumb to think through. Now your HTML mixes with your C# like normal. So you have your @ symbol, and then you can put a variable. But unlike with Razor pages, where that's the code behind, or the page model that we're referencing here, this current count is a private int right on this page. And let's be very clear on that. This is a private integer, and this page has access to it. So these are private. This is local just to this page, but this page does have access to this variable. So these two things are in direct connection. So the current count is just this variable, which is a private integer. It starts off at 0. Now we have a button, a really simple button with a, this is primary button. It has an on click. And this is kind of frustration number 2. And that is with Razor pages, we have this new syntax where we say ASP dash, and we have a number of different options. And that's where all of our commands come in, ASP dash. Well, with Blazor, it's not that way. We have to learn a new set of commands, a set of way of doing things. So it's a little different. So for a click event, it's at for our C# code, at on click. Now, if you see here, it does have that in the menu. So if you were to say at, you can find it here, on copy, on click, on drag start, on drop. So there's a lot of different options you can do, and it does show you in the list. It's just not the same as what Razor Pages does or what MVC does. It's again a different syntax. So just note you're going to have to learn a new syntax, a new way of doing things for Blazor apps. But at the same time, they are different. So it makes sense that they're different. It's just one more thing to learn. Okay, that's just all I'm saying. So at on click, and this is a method name. So when the click event happens, call this method, increment count. Well, private void increment count. That's the method. In fact, if we do a control J here, it would find that in IntelliSense. So it knows what the available methods are, and we can call that method by just putting it in here. So when this button is clicked that says click me, it's going to call this method that says increment count. Increment count simply takes the current count and adds 1 to it. That current count is a private variable, which is currently being displayed up here. That's going to increment that number. So we'll see that. So let's run this page and see what happens. We're going to launch this application. I launch it in Kestrel. You can launch it in IIS Express. It's up to you. Doesn't really matter. I just prefer Kestrel and seeing this output here about what's going on in that web application. And here we go. So here is our web application. It says, hello world, welcome to your new app. And let's click on counter to see that page we just talked about. So first of all, up here, /counter. That's our URL. And it says current count is 0. We have this click me button that says, well, click me. I click it and it changes the value to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Every time I click it, it changes that number. Now, if I go off it and come back, the current count is 0 because we wiped out that page when we left it. All right. Now let's look at what's going on behind the scenes. So we hit F12 to bring up our developer tools. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this screen off of your viewing area so I can show you this in full screen. So under our network tab, this is where we get to see everything that's going on with our network. And currently I'm showing all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh the page, which will reload everything. I'll go back to the home and I'll hit refresh. Now it's a full refresh, which means it's downloaded everything we need. All right. And with that, we have a total of 635 kilobytes of data transferred. What is that data? Well, if we look through, let's sort by size. We have the blazor.server.js, the XHR file, and the script. And those two are 210 kilobytes. And then we have bootstrap.min, which is 152 kilobytes. And then our favicon is 31, and so on, all the way down to our actual page. This is all of our information about our document. Okay? Now, how are we getting this information? If we look at the console, let's actually look at the network. I'm not going to change anything, okay? So we got 10 requests right now. Let's come over here. I'm going to go to counter, watch the number of requests. Didn't change. And I click the counter, click me button. I've clicked it 15 times. Still 10 requests, still 635 kilobytes transferred. So what's going on? How does this work? And how do you even see any network traffic? Because it seems like there's no network traffic even happening. Let's move this off and look here under type. And the one right down here that is an underscore Blazor, and it says question mark ID equals. And this is a WSS connection, which is a WebSocket connection. If I click on this, notice these say binary messages. And you can't really see it over here because it's so tiny, but there is a scroll bar and this thing scrolls for a long time, which may seem really intimidating. Like, man, there's a ton of traffic coming on in this WebSocket connection. No, not really. Because if you look at the length, 3 bytes. Not kilobytes, bytes. This is a binary message that is a total of 3 bytes long. This is our stay alive message. That's really all it is. Now let's clear this, and then I'm going to hit the click me button. Okay? When I did that, it came through with 3 messages. These first 3 right here. So 292 bytes, 149 bytes, and 27 bytes. Let's look at them. All right? If we click on the first one, we see dispatch browser event, and it says event handler, and it says mouse. Right here it says mouse, and then down here it says click event, and then the screen X and Y position of where I clicked it, and the information about the click, okay? Then the next, so that was up. Then down came this, js.render, and it gives us information, including right here it says 16, which is the current count number we're on. So that's the number to display. Now, yes, this is ugly because it's binary. And I'm using a hex viewer to view this as somewhat readable content. This is really binary transfer because WebSockets are all about really efficient transfer of data. In fact, that transfer of data was 149 bytes. So with a 292 byte message, we sent up a event saying the mouse has clicked the button. Here's the X and Y coordinates. Here's all the other information you need to know, and which button it was, all the rest. That's what went up to the server. What came down from the server was 149 bytes, and that's the response saying, okay, put this value in this spot. So it didn't return the whole page, which is what a typical server-side event does. It just returned the value it needed, and then it knew where to put that value on our page to render it. So really efficient, very, very efficient, very quick, and in some ways faster than even a single page application might be, because it's not rendering the whole page, it's not reprocessing all the data on the page, it's just targeting that one piece of information. Now, some single page applications do that and do it efficiently as well. I'm not trying to say this is better than. I'm just saying this is a really efficient way of doing it, just like the more efficient single page applications do. Okay? So that's what's happening behind the scenes. Now, this is still alive. Notice if you scroll down here, we got a lot more going on. A lot more of those 3 byte messages to kind of keep alive, saying, yes, I'm still here. Yes, I'm still here. Kind of ping back and forth practically. Okay? Now, if we go down to the next page I want to look at, fetch data, this gives us a bunch of information, which if we look over here, that was 3.4 kilobytes down. But that's to be expected since what it did is it rendered all this information, this whole page essentially, including this data. And this is real data, or real-ish. Okay? So let's look at this page. Now notice there's not a lot of calls back to our server. It's pretty quiet because what it does, it just does those calls back and forth over the SignalR connection. So let's look at fetch data. Fetch data is a little bit more stuff. First of all, at page, saying yes, this is a Blazor page, and here is the URL /fetch data. Now, we have a using statement at the top. You know what using statements are. In C# code, they just make life easier. So instead of saying Blazor demo UI .data dot something, we can just say whatever the dot was. You know, in this case down here, it is weather forecast. So it's actually Blazor demo UI .data .weather forecast. It shortens it to just weather forecast. The next one's a little interesting. Inject. Inject weather forecast service, and then it has a name after it, forecast service. What's going on here? Well, this is dependency injection, which is why it's called inject. So if we go back over to our startup, and we look here at our configure services, we'll see add singleton for weather forecast service. So this was put into dependency injection as a singleton. Now the fetch data page says, I want that singleton, therefore I'm going to inject it. All right, so this is the equivalent of having a constructor that asks for a weather forecast service. It's just we don't have a constructor on a Blazor page, therefore we inject it. So this is the variable name is forecast service. Now, I'm not a huge fan of forecast service because it is Pascal case and it doesn't have the underscore. Not a huge fan of that. I would prefer to see us use a similar naming convention to C#, and we'll do that when we do it. Okay, so now we have just some basic HTML to set up, and then we have an if statement. If forecasts, what's forecasts? Well, forecast is a private array of weather forecast. All right, so if forecasts equals null, meaning we've not yet instantiated it or not yet put values into it, then we're going to display, and this is kind of cool, this loading right here. So say you have a connection to a weather service and we're going to load data in, but it's kind of slow. Maybe it doesn't load right away. Maybe it takes 3, 4, 5 seconds to load our data. We don't want to show the user this weird blank page. So we can say, hey, if it's null, then go ahead and show the loading indicator, which could be a GIF. It could be a spinning icon. It could be a little guy digging a ditch. Okay, that was what I did back in college and, about 25 years ago. But that's what you can do. Okay, some way of telling the user that, yes, this thing is loading the page. Now, once the forecast is no longer null, that's the else statement, then do this. Let's create a table with all the information, all the header information, then we have a for each. Again, if you've done Razor pages or MVC, you're probably familiar with this structure here. At for each, and then create each row, create a row for each of the forecast items, and then just display the date, the temperature in Celsius and Fahrenheit, and the summary information. Okay, that's all it is. Now, where does this information come from? Well, down here, first of all, you have our private variable to hold the information, but then we have this protected override async task on initialized async. So there's a number of methods that are available to us as page events. So if you say protected override, and then hit space, we see on after render async, on initialize, on parameters set async, and should render. Okay, and of course we also have on initialize async. So there's our options for the events for this page. In this case, they've used the on initialize async and said that the forecast variable should be loaded from the forecast service which forecast service was injected, get forecast async, and pass in the datetime now for when you want the forecast for. Right? that's going to await that, and when it's done, it puts the value into forecasts, which then updates this page to show the else, which is this table. All right, let's look at this forecast service, which is the weather forecast service. Weather forecast service, and this is just kind of simulating data access, and it's saying get forecast async. We got a random generator, and that's going to generate random information for the temperature in Celsius, and then I believe here for the temperature in Fahrenheit is the conversion from Celsius. That way it's always in sync. Nothing weird like 55 degrees in Celsius and Fahrenheit. That'd be kind of odd. All right. So this is how we get the temperature in Fahrenheit to match the Celsius one. But a random temperature in Celsius, a summary that's based upon a random value from this summary array. So it might say freezing when the temperature in Celsius is 55, which is very, very hot. All right. So yes, they're not going to match. That's okay. This is just a simulation of a call to a service. So that's what's happening here. All right. So if we run this again, we'll just see this in action, just again to kind of get the other end of it and see it after we've kind of reviewed it a little bit. So the fetch data, this gives us, notice 75 degrees and warm, 11 degrees and bracing. This is Fahrenheit. I'm more familiar with it, Fahrenheit. 11 degrees and mild, even though 11 degrees is bracing. Okay. Now I did get this one right. 123 degrees Fahrenheit or 51 Celsius is hot. Yes, it is. It's very, very hot, but maybe even blazing. But that's okay. This is just simulating fetching data for us. All right. So that's kind of an overview of how Blazor works, but let's actually make use of it and create our own page to kind of go through some of the pitfalls and processes you might normally do. So let's do this. I'm going to hook up to a database I already have in SQL, and we're going to read people information, first name, last name, email address. And then what we'll do is we'll also have on the same page, we'll have a way to insert new people into the list. So we'll have a loading from the list in SQL and a insert, which is going to save right to SQL. So it's kind of like the full data access for Blazor Server Side. So let's start in the way that you should start with all data access, and that is creating a class library. And the reason why is you do not want to tie your UI, which is our Blazor application, directly to data access. That's unwise. So let's go to C# and we're going to look for a class library, and we'll do .NET Standard. .NET Standard is important because it works across a lot of different platforms, more than just .NET Core does. So .NET Standard, if you can, is the best option. Hit Next, and we're going to call this our, let's just call this our Data Access Library. And we're going to delete class 1. And in here, let's shrink down some of these things. In here, what we'll do is we'll create a class for SQL Data Access. Now we're going to create something very, very basic, something I've done before in a lot of my different demos, because it's so quick and easy to do, and at the same time so powerful. We're going to use Dapper. So we'll use the version right now is 2.0.30. And inside here, we're going to create, first of all, a constructor. And in the constructor, we're going to ask for an I configuration. Control dot, which we need to install the package Microsoft.extensions.configuration.abstraction, which we want to do. And then config control dot to create and initialize the field underscore config. Now, if yours doesn't do underscore, you should watch my Visual Studio configuration tips video that will talk you through how to do that. Actually, it's Visual Studio editor tips, I believe. But that will walk you through how to make that kind of tweak to your system. All right, the other thing I want to do is I'm going to store in a public property. So prop string, let's say connection string name. And by default, it's going to be default. And the reason I'm doing this is because this is a really quick and easy data access library. I'm going to say that by default, it's going to access the connection string called default. And if you want to change that, you just change this property right here. If you want, you can get more in depth with these libraries. I do in the Timco Retail Manager series, but this is basically the same pattern we're going to do, but a little simpler for this demo. The point is not to teach data access. If you want to learn about Dapper, you can watch my Connecting C# to SQL the Easy Way video or my Advanced Dapper video. This is more about getting something in place, but at the same time, I don't want to skip over it and leave you questioning what's going on. So we'll talk through it, but talk through it kind of fast. Public async task, which control dot to add using system.thread tasks, and a list of type T, load data. And load data is going to be a generic, and have T and U as the options, string SQL, and U parameters. And so it's going to take in two different types. Actually, one a SQL, which is a SQL string, and then a parameters, which is a generic type. It will return a list of T, a generic type. So string connection string equals underscore config dot get connection string, and then pass in connection string name. Notice that the IntelliCode is kind of showing me what to do there with the starred values. It's making life a little easier for me. Using IDB connection, control dot to add using system.data, connection equals new SQL connection, control dot to add, actually to install package system.data.SQL client, and we're going to say connection string. Notice a star there to make my life a little easier. Okay, and then inside our using statement, let's move this up a little bit. We're going to say var data equals await connection dot query async, control dot to add our using Dapper. So query async of type T, and pass in our SQL and our parameters. So what this is doing, it is going to query our SQL database, and it's going to pass in our SQL statement and our parameters, and it's going to get back a list of type T. Actually, an IEnumerable of type T. That's what this is going to be right here, this data. We want a list of type T, so we're going to return data dot to list, control dot to add the using system.link. So this is our load data. This is all you have to do to load data. We're not going to do store procedures, just regular SQL statements, really quick and easy little statements. Oops, not open, save. Now, public async task save data of type T, string SQL, and T parameters. So the parameters can be anything you want them to be. They're generic. String, actually we can just copy this right here. Get the connection string. Actually, let's copy this whole thing. The difference is inside of our using statement. So await connection dot execute async SQL and parameters. What this is going to do is save data. This is an execute statement, which is going to run an insert, a update, a delete, something of that nature where we don't need to have data coming back. And it's going to run whatever SQL statement we give it and the parameters and return nothing except for the fact that the task itself saying, yes, it's complete. So that's save data. Now it's asking for an I configuration. Well, we're going to put this in a dependency injection. So that's going to come through from our front end. And we already have I configuration built into our Blazor application. Now, I do like to have an interface. So let's do a quick actions and refactoring and extract interface. I'll hit OK. I haven't put this in a folder. Debate if I should or not. I'm not going to. All right. So right in the root here. And let's add a new class here. And let's call this people data. Make it public. And I'm also going to need to have a model here for the data. So let's do this. Let's create a new class inside the models folder. And we'll call this class, let's call it person model. Make it public. And we're going to have 3 properties in here. First name, last name, email address. All right, that's it. So now in our people data, let's have a constructor, CTOR. And inside here, we're going to ask for an iSQL data access. We're going to call this DB. Control dot to create initialize our field. So now we have access to this iSQL data access. We're going to have a public task, control dot to add our using statement there. Task of type list of person model. Control dot to add our using statement for that. So this is going to be get people. Pretty simple stuff. String SQL equals select star from dbo.people. That's our database table name. Now, where's our database? Well, I've got a little database here in SQL Server Object Explorer. Let's load this. So let's add a connection here. I don't have a connection evidently. To my local DB and hit connect. There we go, local DB. Inside here, let's look for the person database. Inside the tables, I have this people. Okay, I'm not even sure when I created this person DB, but in here we have first name, last name, date of birth if they have one, and an email address. All right, so there's our records for this table. We're only going to worry about the first name, last name, and email address. We'll ignore date of birth. So get everything from people, which means it's going to return back the date of birth even though we don't need it. Now, the beauty of Dapper is it's okay. It's just going to ignore that column and not do anything with that data. But it's more efficient to select first name, last name, and email address from dbo.people. Just so you know. I'm going to say select star is fine, and then return underscore db.load data of type person model, and also dynamic is a second type, and say SQL and new empty anonymous object. So what that is our parameters, which we have no parameters. It's getting us all the people, so therefore that's all we need. Again, this is a really quick and easy call to our database. We're not doing anything that's really in depth here. We're just doing the basic select star from. So get people, we also need an insert person. So public task insert person, and we'll say this is a takes a person model called person, like so. And we want to say string SQL equals, this is a little more complicated, so I'm going to have an at symbol at the beginning, so I can do 2 lines. Insert into dbo.people, first name, last name, email address. Hit enter, and I'm going to tab over so it's kind of in line, and say values. And then a little trick here I do, I copy this and paste it, put my semicolon at the end, but then I put the at symbol in front of each of these because I typically match up my variable names to the column names. So that makes it easy to create this insert statement because I can just copy and paste those values. Now I can say return underscore db dot save data SQL and person. Person, which is what's the model being passed in, that's my parameters. It has first name, last name, and email address. SQL is this statement right here, where it's going to insert the values from my person object into these 3 spots. That's all there is to it. Now, I am saying here, just return save data, which save data is an awaitable task. I'm not awaiting it. I'm letting it go right through. I don't need to await it here. There's no purpose for awaiting it here. There's no purpose for putting extra stress on the stack or extra work on the stack. I'm going to let it just go through right as a task. Same thing up here. I'm just returning this, which is returning the whole task. This is not async. This is actually, it's passing the task through asynchronously. So a little trick there to make life a little easier by doing one less await that I don't need to do. All right, so now we have that. Let's again go to people data, quick actions refactoring, extract the interface for that. So we have an interface called iPeopleData. And now with this, we can come over to our startup. And in here, we can say services.addTransient for iSQL data access. Control dot to add our using statement. Add a reference to data access library and add the using statement. And then say SQL data access is the type. And then services.addTransient. And this is iPeopleData. And that's going to be a people data object. Transient means it's going to create an instance every time we ask for one. Singleton creates one instance for the entire application. Now, I don't want to forget, and I often do, I'm going to go to appsettings.json for my Blazor UI. I'm going to add a connection string in here. I often forget this. Connection strings, plural. Inside here, I want to say default. And then in here, what's my connection string? Well, SQL Server Object Explorer, person DB, right click and go to properties. And then the properties, we have down here connection string. Double click, Control C, Control V. Saves me a lot of typing and a lot of guesswork as to what things are. All right, that's my connection string. I am using integrated security equals true, which means you can go ahead and copy this if you want. It won't work on your machine unless you have it in the exact same spot. And it would be your database, not mine, because it's using integrated security. So just note that if you get the source code, you may have to change this connection string to be your database, not mine. Okay, so we have the connection string. We have the mapped services that we need. Now let's create a page for our people, our inserting people, okay? Now I could create the page right underneath pages. I'm going to create it under a new folder. And just to kind of demonstrate that this is totally different, totally separate from the routing of this, I'm going to call this My Pages. Now that's not a great name for a real data access, but this is a demonstration just to show you that this folder has no bearing on anything when it comes to Blazor pages. So let's right click on here and say add. This one you'll get wrong at least once every time you build this application for a while. I do, still. And the reason why is because the first option is a razor page, which my brain always associates with .razor. But that's not what a razor page is. A razor page is a .cs HTML page with a page model behind it. That's not what we want. Instead, we want new item. And then in here, you see the Blazor symbol and it says razor component, which again, confusing because we have razor page, razor view, and razor component. But that's the one we want, razor component. Notice the .razor as the extension. In here, let's give this a name of just people is fine. Add. And so now you have this page. It's very, very simple. I'm going to add a few things to it. First, I'm going to say that this is a page and that it's going to be slash, let's call it slash data slash people. Now, notice that slash data slash people does not match my folder structure of my pages. This is just to demonstrate that, in fact, this page path is totally separate from this folder path. Now, best practice would be to name your folders after the paths and then put the items that are in that path in that location. So if we rename this folder from my pages to data, that would make sense. But again, this is a demo purpose just to show the disconnect here. Now, I'm going to add a few using statements here just to make sure I have everything I need. First of all, using, I want to say data access library, and then another using statement for data access library dot models. And that's it for now. I'll probably add another one soon. And then I want to get access to my data access. So at inject, and I want a iPeople data. I'm going to call it DB. Actually, underscore DB. This is my database, essentially. Now, if I had more than one, I might call this people database or people data even, but I call it underscore DB just to be simple, and it's kind of obvious, I think. So let's start off with a little bit of modification of the HTML. I'm going to say this is the people page. That's an H1 tag. And then I'm going to create a H4 tag, something a little smaller. And I'm going to say current people. I'm going to have that if statement that says, hey, if no people in a list, but I don't have any people object yet, so let's create one of those. So let's come down here, and we're going to say private list of person model. And we're going to call this people. I'm not going to initialize it. And instead, I'm going to come down here and say protected override and say the on initialized async. Now I hit tab, it tabbed over again, which frustrates me, but I'm going to tab it back. If you highlight more than one line and hit shift and hit tab, it moves everything back one tab indent. And if you hit tab, it outdents it everything one. So just in case you didn't know that right there. Now in here, I'm going to say people equals underscore db dot get people. Now, actually, I want to say await. And this should be a sync task. So I'm going to await the get people call. Now, get people is going to call my SQL data access and do a select star from dbo.people. When it's done, it's going to map it over to my people and put it into this object. So when this page loads, it's going to load people into this list. All right? That's, in theory, what's going to happen. Let's come up here and start writing code to that effect. So at if people is null, then our paragraph tag and our EM, I'm stealing this right from the example, loading. I like it. I think it's simple, clean, easy, and it works. But the else statements, we're going to have our table. And actually, need a class in here. Let's say class equals table and table striped. Those are bootstrap CSS commands that allow us to have a striped table, which is kind of nice. I'm going to have a header section, TR, inside here, TH. Let's have first name, last name, and email address. There's my header row. And now I'm going to have my body and then have my at for each and say for each person in people. So I'll loop through all of my people in my private list. And in here I'm going to say each one gets a row. And I'll have data for that row at person.firstname at person.lastname and at person.email address. There's our three entries or three properties for our person object. Let's see if just this works. Now this is, again, SQL data access, but I do want to point out one more time, this is talking to a class library. This class library can talk to ASP.NET Core Razor Pages or MVC. It can talk to WinForms, WPF, console applications, Xamarin projects. It can talk to any of these. So just note that this same data access, this identical data access, will work with any of your C# applications. So don't think this is specific to Blazor. Okay, let's start this and let's see this page. And well, you know what? It's going to start, but I'm not going to see this page in action. I don't have a link to it. So the path is data/people. Let's go to our shared and go to nav menu. I like this. The nav menu is on the side and it's totally separate from the rest of our application as far as it's not in main layout. We just have this nav menu. And the nav menu, in here, we can modify our navigation. Let's put after fetch data. I'm going to copy this whole thing, paste it, and I'm going to say that instead of fetch data, it's going to be let's say data/people. There we go, which matches our data/people route. All right, and let's not do OI-list. Let's do control dot here. OI is it's a open source icon library, and we're going to say there's one for people. So we're going to use that for the icon instead. And instead of fetch data, it's going to be people. Right? Now we can run this. We can actually see an icon on our navigation as well. So we've started up, and now we have this people entry. Click on it. And you saw for the briefest of seconds, maybe if you pause the video, you can see it. You saw the, hey, we're loading. But now we have records from the database. These are actual people from the real database. Go back and come over. They're still there because every time it loads from the database. But it's just getting back just the data it needs, so it's a really efficient connection. Now, I'm going to take it up a notch. Let's close this out. And you might say, well, how would you insert people into this page or into this list? And I am so glad you asked. I'm going to show you how to do that. Let's start by creating in our Blazor UI I'm going to create a new folder and call it models. Notice I'm using the model right from the data access library, but now I'm going to create a new model. And I'm going to call this display person model. And the reason why is I want to add some UI specific code to my model. So let's start with our person model. I'm just going to copy this for sake of time, and I'm going to paste it in here. But I'm going to add some stuff to this. First, required. Control dot to add our using statement for system.componentModel.data annotations. And then next, I'm going to say, hey, you know what? The string length, the max length a name should be is, let's just say that a max name length is 15. That's way too short, but I want to show you these error messages. And then error message is going to be first name is too long. I'm also going to say, you know what? Let's have a min length as well. Min length is 5. Again, you shouldn't have a min length on a name, or if you do, it should be 1 character, maybe 2, but probably 1. And then the error message, and I say 1 because there's the actor Maggie Q. Well, Q would be her last name. Now that may be a stage name, I'm not even sure, but doesn't matter. That would break your system. So, but this again is for demo purposes. So, first name is too long. Oops, too short. I'll look it up top. Let's copy these 3 right here. I'm going to paste them on top of last name. I'm going to change everything here to say last name instead of first name. For email address, I'm not going to write length. I'm going to say required, but I am going to also say this is an email address, which means it's going to make sure that it's formatted as an email address. So this is a front-end model. This is a model with specific error messaging for the front end for the user to see, and it's much more specific to display and validation and those type of things, rather than what you might see for just data access. So that's why we're going to have a separate model. This is actually pretty common to have front-end models that are your display models and to have back-end models which are your data models. So just note that you will have some applications that do this kind of data transfer from one model type to the other. And we're going to do a little bit of that here. Now that we have that done, let's go back to our people page and add a using statement. At using, this is Blazor demo UI.models. So we can access that model without having a full path to it. Then down here in our code, we're going to add a new private variable. Private display person model. We're going to call this new person equals new display person model. I'm going to instantiate it right away. Okay, note that. I did not instantiate the list right away. I did instantiate this new person right away. Next, I'm going to come up here after the people page H1 tag, but before the H4 tag for current people. I'm going to put a new H4 tag. And here I'm going to say insert new person. So you're going to be able to insert a new person above the list of the current people. Now forms are a bit different. We're going to open up a new tag called an edit form. An edit form has a model. That model is at new person. All right, that's the instance we just created. So right down here, this display person model, new person. That's what we're saying right here is the model for our form. And then on valid submit, here's a tricky bit. Okay, when I said on, I have on submit, on valid submit, and on invalid submit. Be very careful you get the right one. I only want the valid submit, meaning that they have put in a proper first name, last name, and email address. You could do more than one of these events and say, for invalid submit, do something different. But you don't want to do that probably for the default case, the most cases. So make sure it's on valid submit. Now, I will tell you that one of the problems I had was it was never submitting right. My form wasn't working right. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Turns out I had accidentally said on and saw valid submit up here and hit tab. That's on invalid submit, meaning it only worked when the data was incorrect. I was putting correct data in and not figuring out why it didn't work. Nothing seemed to happen. My code wasn't getting hit. It was only when I put in bad information that I found that my code was being hit. So just note, make sure you have the right one on valid submit. And we're going to create a method down here. Let's create a method real quick. We're going to say private void for right now, insert person, like so. And then up here, we'll say at insert person. All right, that's our method to call when a valid submit happens. Close our tags. And then in here, we're going to say, first of all, data annotations validator. That's going to validate our data annotations. What are data annotations? Well, they're these things right here. Okay, so it's going to run those validations. And then we're going to have a validation summary at the top. What's this? This is a message that says, hey, this stuff's not valid. What is it? The cool thing is I don't have to do anything. I can just say validation summary right there, and it's going to put those messages to the user in that spot without me having to format them or anything else. It just happens. Now, input text. Again, a little different because this is a C# form more than it is an HTML form. And we're going to give this ID. We'll say ID is first name and then at bind value. So what's the value for this? Well, it's going to be new person dot first name. Now this is a really simple little form. I'm not going to do anything complex like putting the labels on it and all the rest. It's really basic, just enough to show you that this will work. All right, so last name, and let's make sure that we change this to be last name. We will change this to be email address. And then down here, we're going to have a simple button that says, well, type equals submit. And let's say the class equals btn dash primary. Sounds good. And submit is fine. All right. Very basic form. Not worried about the formatting of this. I'm just going to have a simple form. So what does this form do? Let's come down here to our private void insert person. I'm actually going to change this to be private async task because I'm going to insert data in for my person. I have to wait that. But first, if I were to do that, let's just do await d_db dot insert person. Pass in the person model. Well, how about new person? No, that's not going to work. Okay, it's going to give me a red squiggly because cannot convert from display person model to person model. These are different models. So how do I convert? Well, I could use a tool like AutoMapper, but in this case, I'm going to do it the manual way. Person model P equals new person model. I'm going to say first name equals new person dot first name. Last name equals new person dot last name. And email address equals new person email address. Put my semicolon at the end. And now I can insert P, which is our mapped person. Now, this only happens if this is a valid person. So you don't have to worry about the information for our new person being correct. It will be correct. Next, after I've inserted in the database, I'm also going to say people, which people is my list up here that I'm displaying, .add P. Now you're saying, wait, Tim, why are you doing that? Why are you adding to the list directly? And the reason I'm doing that is because that list is not showing anything database specific. It's not showing like the ID of the user or the date time that's inserted or anything else that'd be specific to what's in the database that I don't have when I created this person. So I can kind of cheat. And this is not a bad cheat. This is a good cheat. And what I'm doing is I'm not doing a whole new call to the database and loading all the people again. I'm just adding this person to the end. If that didn't work for you, you can just take this call right here, this whole line, copy it, and overwrite this line right here with that line. And it will update from the database after you've inserted the record. So either way will work. My way is just a little bit less work on the database side, a little less data transfer across the wire, and nobody gets hurt. All right? But now don't forget, new person equals new display person model, wiping out the information from the last insert. Okay? With that being done, I hit save. I think that's all we need to do to wire this up. Let's see this in action. Let's see if I forgot anything too, because you know how it goes. I usually forget something. Okay, people. There's first name, last name, and email address. I told you it wasn't pretty. It's just basic stuff. Now, if I said Tim and hit tab, notice right away it says, hey, the first name is too short. And it puts a red outline around Tim. Okay, well, let's instead do something a little bit long. How about Tammy? That's 5 letters. Cool. Now it's green. How about Joan, like that? 4 letters. Nope, last name is too short. Well, what if I said like this? Lots of characters. Now last name is too long. Notice it says change to long. Just fine now. If I said test, email address is not a valid email address. Okay, so now I can change this to be Tammy at jones.co. All right, now it's valid. I hit submit. Watch what happens after Bilbo. There's Tammy, right down at the end. Okay, it was immediate, it was quick, and if I go off this page and come back to it, Tammy's still there because Tammy's in the database now, not just inserted manually on this page. Unlike the counter, which after you go away and come back, it's wiped out again. And every time you fetch the data, it's a little different. Okay, like -14, fetch it again, and now it's 47. That's because these are all just dummy data that's been generated and wiped out. This data is stored in the database. So now you've seen how Blazor Server Side can interact with actual real code that talks to a real database and does so in a really efficient manner, where you have that nice client-side interactivity where you see things pop on the page and the page doesn't have to reload the whole thing, and it's not re-downloading or redrawing the entire page. And yet at the same time, I didn't write any JavaScript code. This is what Blazor really excels at, is allowing us to stay in C#, writing our C# code that we're good at, and yet gives us that functionality that has been purely the domain of JavaScript. Okay, so this is giving us kind of the best of both worlds, where your team can take the expertise it already has and reuse it in a client-side display manner in such a way that is much more interactive that the user wants, without having to be much more expensive in your team. Okay. One of the things I hear a lot from brand new C# developers or C# developers who are getting into web is they say, okay, well, can you teach me Angular? Or can you teach me React? Or can you teach me Vue? And the list goes on of these JavaScript front-end frameworks. And what I typically push back on is, do you know C# yet? Because learning something like Angular or Vue or React, you have to learn JavaScript first and in depth. You can't just say, I'm going to learn the framework. You have to learn the code that is the framework, JavaScript. And if you don't learn that, then you'll be really in dangerous territory, okay? Because it may work for a while, and all of a sudden the magic breaks and you have no clue why, and you're kind of up a creek. Besides the fact that frameworks change a lot. And so if you base your life on one specific framework, that's going to change. If you don't understand the structure behind JavaScript and how it works and how to read the way the new framework is working and how to keep up with that, then you're going to fall behind and you're going to actually be in a worse place than you were to begin with. So there's a lot to learn when you go down the JavaScript route. I'm not saying don't go down the JavaScript route. I've done it, and I love JavaScript. It's a great language for a lot of things. But when your team is heavily invested in C# and they don't have the skills necessarily to be also heavily invested in JavaScript, then something like Blazor Server Side is a great option. Because you can't necessarily have the full depth you want in both areas, okay? When you start getting really deep into JavaScript, you'll probably lose some of your skills in C#. It just happens. Your brain is only so big. Maybe yours is bigger than mine. I don't know. But I have found personally that I forget how to do things in one way because I've been doing it so long the other way. And then it's this context switch all the time between, is this JavaScript and the way JavaScript does things, or is this C#? And so things like Blazor allow you to reduce or remove that context switch. Now, you can still use JavaScript in Blazor. So there is, I'm not going to show it today, but there are ways to bring in JavaScript libraries and really do the same things you were doing before, where you have mapping and all these other cool things that JavaScript can do, and yet also mix in your C# code. So it's not like you're saying this is against JavaScript, or this is the alternative to JavaScript. It is in a way, but at the same time, it's not a walled garden. You can still bring JavaScript into this. It's just that it reduces the stress and the need to have JavaScript for sometimes what is really simple little pages like this. This can do very complex things, but oftentimes I find that people spool up frameworks and tooling and all the rest just to have a simple set of pages. So just note, Blazor Server Side, great option for things like this, where it's simple, it's easy. I can put, testing users test at 123.com, and I hit submit. My page doesn't have to refresh or redraw. It's just there. I can even put sorts in here if I wanted to sort these entries, all without having to go back to the server and reload a whole new page. But yet at the same time, I'm using C# to do all this. Okay? So this is a kind of a game changer in our industry that allows us to be more efficient in our team training, in our team development, and in being able to do more things with C#. So that, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to give you a source code. The source code is in the description down below. There's a link to get that. I'll email it to you. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them down in the comments. Any thoughts on this? What do you think the pros and cons are? What are the areas you're looking forward to doing this in? Just note we are going to use this probably in the Timco Retail Manager, and we'll talk more about that next week, I believe, when we cover what's next for Timco Retail Manager. That's coming soon. I think it's next week. And we're going to kind of go over this a few more times in a few different ways. So it might even have a start to finish course that uses Blazor as part or even the whole user interface for the applications. So this is going to have a lot of different ways to use Blazor you'll see coming down the road, because this is a pretty important technology. All right. So thanks for watching. Leave the comments down below what you thought. I'd appreciate a thumbs up as well if you enjoyed the video. And as always, I am Tim Corey.